So for those of you who are on Facebook a lot, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the OTS group. That's a group dedicated to the on-the-spot beekeeping method. You might be familiar with the gentleman we have speaking today because he contributes quite a bit to that forum. But we have John Schwarts here to talk about that. So without any further ado, I shall give it over to John.
Hey, John. So I don't speak very loud. You might want to move up. By the end of the talking time, I'm probably too soft to hear. So feel free to move up. Okay, there's my tether. All right, I want to talk about OTS. Of course, Dan just mentioned. Thanks, Dan, for where'd you go? Okay. Thanks for and Melinda for inviting me. I want to talk about, give you specifics, and introduce to you the concepts of OTS, and explain really OTS stands for on the spot, like Dan mentioned. It's really focused on queenering, but it changes the paradigm a bit for beekeeping compared to what most folks are used to when it comes to raising queens and increasing your colonies. And I just want to maybe try and help expand your toolkit, what options you have with this methodology to help you in your beekeeping in your backyard. Number two, I just want to explain carefully how you can use this method to raise queens. One, increase your colonies, prevent swarming, and help manage your mites. That's a lot of stuff. And it doesn't sound like it's possible, but just a couple of tweaks to the way you do things can make a big difference in your success. So at the end, too, I just want to field any questions that you might have. I'm sure you'll have. And then also just stop me anytime as we go. So about me a little bit. From Oregon, my wife, Christy, is with us, and we have 6 kids, and Christy's homeschooled them all. She's a trooper. And we live in Solon, not too far away. And I work as a digital manager for truthforlife.org. It's in Bainbridge. And I blog at the Bee Farm, which you can follow. That's the website. And I post there maybe every 2-3 weeks. Not a lot, but they're long posts, probably way too long, but I like to get them as good as I can. And then also Dan mentioned there's a beekeeping group, OTS, Queenering it's called, and feel free to join that. That's what it looks like. There's a bee and a flower. Here we are. And then I've been beekeeping since I started reading about beekeeping in 2004. And I read this old novel, and it got me hooked. And since 2005, really, been keeping bees. Started in Oregon, which is kind of a difficult place to keep bees, and then Alaska, which is almost impossible. In fact, I only met one guy who was successful in Alaska keeping bees, keeping them alive. So I know like 1%. I don't know much. And as you guys know, the more you get into beekeeping, the less you know. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? So, but on the flip side, I want to encourage you. Some of the things that I've learned just in the last 5 years has revolutionized how I do beekeeping and my success. And it's just one small facet. There's other people that do things completely different that are successful as well. I'm not claiming that this way is the way you need to do beekeeping. Okay. So what is OTS? I met a guy, Mel Disselcohen is his name. He's from Michigan. I have no clue. Michigan, I'm getting used to Ohio. I don't even know anything about Michigan, but he's from Michigan. And you can find him usually at the Tri-County in Worcester, the conference every year. He's always got a table right at the entrance. He's an older gentleman. That's Mel. And he sells a book for way too much, but it's worth every penny. And that's one of the first guys I met when we moved here, and I picked up his book after flipping through it, and it just really changed the way I looked at queenering especially. This is his website, just so you have his information. He gives away a ton of this information I'm going to give to you tonight just for free. Down the middle of that page there's a lot of links to PDFs. He usually gives an update once or twice a year. Less so in the last few years, but there's a lot of backlog there that you can go, just do some research. And that's his book. I brought a copy if you want to flip through it. OTS Queenery, and I told him we'd be talking tonight, and I'd be mentioning the book, and he said, welcome, or hello from Michigan. So, all right, so OTS. Really, it's as simple as, thanks for the water, Dan. OTS is really as simple as, I'm going to borrow a hive tool. When you go to the apiary, your backyard, and the conditions are right, drones are flying, mature drones, you've got good weather, you and your hive tool, and a couple minutes, you can be raising queens. It's that simple. And really, in a nutshell, and I'll get into more detail, in a nutshell, I'll show you a couple pictures. It's just taking your hive tool and inserting it all the way to the midrib and bending down. You're just inserting that at the bottom of the cell shaped like this, and you got the bottom floor of the cell. That's where you're inserting the hive tool all the way to the midrib and bending down, flattening it. And what you're doing, all you're doing is creating space for those bees to pull out a queen cell vertically. And for some reason, when you do that, and you've removed the queen from the hive, the bees are directed to that spot. You're assisting them, and for some reason, they begin to build out cells. It's really that simple. That concept changes some paradigms. We'll talk about that a bit. So there's a picture right here where Mel has gone in and inserted the hive tool underneath 36-hour or less larvae. So as you get involved in beekeeping and you start doing your inspections, you start to notice some things right off the bat. You're looking for eggs. You're looking for little shiny spots at the bottom of the cell, which tells you what? A little dab of royal jelly there. Probably the egg has just emerged. Actually, the skin dissolves. They don't hatch or emerge. It dissolves, and they lay down flat on the bottom of the cell. And you can start to recognize the age of those larvae by just locating the tiniest little glistening spots on the bottom of the cell where those eggs have just emerged and laid down. And those are the perfect larvae to notch under. That's what you're looking for, and that's what he's done right there. Here's another picture. Usually those tiny larvae are just, these are C-shaped. Sometimes they're even less than C-shaped, just barely curved, but this is what they're going to look like, about that size. And he's taking his hive tool straight in and bend it down. You can take a stick if you want, a little twig, or any kind of a tool that you can cut into that wax and bend it down. That's all that's required. So this changes some paradigms. That the current paradigm for me up until a few years ago was I lose most of my bees, and I'm going to buy bees every year. I'm either buying queens, or I'm buying package bees, or I'm buying nukes every year. And interestingly, I was just at the Worcester conference and sat down eating donuts and just listening to people. Every last person I talked to this winter lost all their hives, or maybe all but one or two, from all over the state and out of the state. And that's just the paradigm has been a dependence on queen and bee growers from California, Georgia, Florida, really, right? That's where we get our bees, for the most part. The new paradigm with this little system, OTS, it's moved that power from that structure from outside our state into your backyard. It's so easy to raise a quality queen and to multiply your hives. It's giving you now new options that you didn't have before that cost nothing. My problem in the last few years has not been buying bees or spending money on bees. It's been, how am I going to buy all the boxes I'm going to need to facilitate all this growth, and how do I get rid of bees? So I'm having to sell nukes, and I'm having to get rid of bees to friends down the street. So that's been my problem. I think that's a good problem to have. I would think you guys would think the same.
Shameless sales pitch. You still have any nukes available?
I don't. I don't even market my nukes because that's the paradigm. Everyone needs bees so badly. Plus, there's lots of new beekeepers coming into the fold as well. It's not just people losing their bees.
But you did sell out then.
I sold out, and and that's overwintered nukes is what I like to sell. And then in July, end of June, I'm making splits just the normal way with new queens. So I'll have some. Thanks, Dan.
No problem.
A bonus as you think about it, instead of bringing bees in from a small group of producers in California and Florida, it creates a genetic bottleneck. Instead of that occurring now, all of a sudden, all of us in our locale here with our damp, cold, etc., all the problems we've got, I'm sure Dan and Richard are really working hard on developing strains that overwinter here. All of a sudden, we're developing our own strains of bees that overwinter well in Ohio, and we're not dependent upon a tight bottleneck of DNA coming from the same producer every year that may or may not survive here in Ohio. Mel likes to say, and his goal is that you would never buy bees again, and that's been my experience the last 5-6 years. So that's the goal. So the basic outline of OTS queenery, like I mentioned, right now is not a good time to do OTS because I don't have mature drones, at least not the last time I looked. Have any of you seen drones at all?
Not in Ohio.
Not in Ohio, yeah. So not for a while. But typically for the last couple of years, it's been April 21st through May 1st for me when I felt like I'm seeing enough mature drones, the weather's good, my hives are starting to expand. I have carniolan nuts. Who knows what they are now? No one can tell you what a bee really is. My carniolans overwinter in small clusters and then expand really quickly. Italians are more overwinter in a large cluster. So anyways, once the timing's right, probably in the next 3 weeks for us right now is the way it's looking. What I do is I either in the spring actually I'm removing the queen from that colony. Let's just focus on one colony. I'm removing the queen and 2 frames of brood, and I'm putting it in a nuke. I'm also taking a frame of honey and putting it in that nuke, and an empty frame of comb that she can lay in. I've got an overwintered nuke, a split. It's called an artificial swarm. So I'm doing that a week before swarm season. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But I've created a nuke. In my original hive, now there's no longer a laying queen, it's queenless. Within a few minutes, that hive is recognizing, hey, we've lost our queen, we need to create a queen. So that's when you grab your hive tool and you're looking for every frame of comb in there that's got just emerged larvae, and you're making a notch or 2 on every frame that has larvae available for notching. You close the hive up. You usually are going to move that nuke a couple miles away. I don't. I've just been leaving them in the same yard and having no problems. But most people, I recommend moving it away 2 miles. A week later, you go back to that original colony. You open it up, and you're going to find on every frame you notched queen cells, beautiful queen cells, more than you can handle. Right now, in the past, I looked at queens like I would get really nervous around a queen because I didn't want to hurt it. These days, I can raise so many queens with OTS. They're like a dispensable commodity. They're like a drone or a worker almost to me, because I'm able to raise all these queen cells, quality queen cells, and I have options now. So what I do then is I've got usually end of April, May 1st, I started with maybe 6 to 8 frames of brood at the most. I've taken out 2. A week later, I go back to that colony. I've got about 6 frames of brood left, capped brood. And I've got maybe 2 or 3 frames with queen cells on them. I've got options. I can keep that hive together, or I can split it into up to 3. I can do the same thing I just did with that original queen with these queen cells. And that's typically what I do, is split that in half. So a week earlier, I had 1 overwintered colony. Now I've got 3 colonies. 1 with a laying queen, 2 that are going to be mated. And typically, any queen producer is going to see between an 85–90% mating success rate. And you can just about count on about 90%. 1 out of 10 are just going to fail. They're going to get eaten by a bird or whatever. So I have created 3 colonies. They're on the same pallet. Usually I keep them on the same pallet. And 30 days from when I first notched that original colony, I can come back, I can leave them alone, I can come back 30 days later, and I'm going to have laying queens in those hives. And I'm going to have 3 colonies. And here's the cool part. In about June 21st to July 4th, anywhere in there, you can do the whole thing all over again to every single colony. I can take 1 colony every year and make it into 10 without fail every year. I'm only limited by the number of boxes and space in my backyard.
How much does that limit your honey production?
It's a good question. If you're going to be splitting that aggressively, you're not going to get much honey. You're going to get some. Actually, if you think about it, you're going to maybe harvest a frame or 2 of honey at the most from every colony throughout the course of the, if you have, all things being equal and you have a good flow. Times 10, it's still a box of honey, right? But there's options that you've got. Say, this is what I would do if I was going to go for honey. I would split those. I would create the initial 3 colonies, right? And what's your flow here, the one you really shoot for? What time of year?
It really depends. We have a pretty good flow very early, the linden flow, but probably our largest flow is going to be goldenrod in the fall.
Yeah, goldenrod. I've got a decent flow in my neighborhood because it's all planted in basswood, linden trees. That's around end of June, early July. Depends on the year. What I want to do is I've got options. You can take all those different splits and simply recombine them at the right time. Okay, so say I had taken 1 colony and I've made it into 8 by the middle of June, and I want to go, I'm going to say half of them for honey. I can take 4 of them and recombine them into 2 colonies, 2 nice honey colonies, or I can make 1 big giant colony by just removing all the queens but 1 and doing a paper combine with all those colonies together. And or what I do every July is I kill every queen in my yard. And you can take, and I have them all requeen themselves, and you have this brood break for 30 days that you time with the flow. So even a small colony can capture the entire, for 30 days they've got no brood to rear and no brood to feed. Usually a full strength colony will go through 60 pounds of honey just to raise the bees for a month. If you don't have those bees and you've removed the queen, there's no brood, you've given them a brood break, you got 60 pounds or more of honey that you can harvest. So there's ways you can recombine those colonies and create honey hives. I'll show you some pictures of what that looks like. So here, any questions? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Use this to point. So I'll just reiterate. This is your original overwintered colony. Okay. This is your 2 frames of brood and your original queen that you've made a split with, an artificial swarm. Okay. You now have here, after you've taken her out, you have your cell builder. Okay, with about 6 frames of brood. You can also, what he's saying here is you can also not split out your queen. You can just kill the queen and make a honey hive. That's what he's saying here. So, so now you've got your May 1st split the artificial swarm, you got a cell builder. A week later, right here is where you would make your 3 starts, he calls them, splits, with 2 frames of brood in each one and a queen cell in each one. So 3 weeks from that point, you're going to have most likely 3 mated colonies and a 4th up top with the original queen. Okay. Then in July, end of June here or July, you've got options. The top option, you could split them all again. Remove the queens, raise your queens, and have 4 new splits going into winter. Or you could make them a bit stronger, 2 or 3 per hive. Or you could say, I'm going to go for 4 frames of brood and honey, or just 1 big 8-frame honey producer. So you've got a lot of different options. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So increasing colonies with OTS and artificial swarms. So the problem most people have is losing too many bees. The solution is, as we've talked about, you can learn to split and grow your colonies using OTS to raise queens without spending a penny on bees. So the idea here is, in the past, we've been dependent on keeping our bees alive. If we lose it, we're out. I've got no options. I've got to go buy bees. I got to go, Dan, can I bum a queen? Dan, can you give me a nuke? I got to start all over again, or you just got to wait a whole nother year. Instead, with this system, you're creating many hives in your backyard, or more than you normally would. Say you're used to having 2 hives in your backyard. That's a gamble. What if you lose one of those to mites? What if both of those don't overwinter? You're buying bees again. But what if it's instead you raise 10 colonies, or 8 or 6? Your goal might be to overwinter 4 or 5 in hopes you get 3 through the winter. Now you've got options. Come next winter, you've got 3 overwinter colonies that you can turn into 30 if you really wanted to. Okay. So what it's doing is you're outbreeding your problems. Your problems might be mites. They might be what's some of the main reasons you're seeing bees die?
Almost inevitably, you can blame mites.
Yeah.
If it's not the mites directly, it usually ends up being a disease that the mites themselves have spread.
Right. Yeah.
It's almost always mites.
That's my experience in the last 5 years. It's been I see a hive get really robust and then all of a sudden just collapse, and that's mites. It's classic. Or I see K-wing or wandering bees in the grass out front. That means they're sick with parasitic mite syndrome or a number of other different diseases that are occurring because the mites are injuring the bees. They may not be outright killing them, but they're injuring them and causing disease to be vectored through those injuries. Or just feeding the parasitic nature of feeding on the larva in the cell, it just makes them susceptible to disease. So that's one way to combat this issue you have with losing all your bees and having to buy bees is outproduce them. Expect some losses. That's just normal. If any kind of endeavor that we go through in life, we always want to hedge our bets a little bit, do a little bit more than we need to, knowing that we're going to get some losses. One thing too that Mel preaches that I have seen really successful for my apiary is not letting my bees swarm. And so I'm doing this OTS procedure every year, and it's a little different every year depending on the weather, and that's where a club is really helpful. You guys can be exchanging notes. What do you think this year? When should we? When is it going to be dangerous time for swarming? What do you guys think? And when you're just on your own, and on your own, it's really tough to figure that out, especially if you're a new beekeeper. But probably around April 26th to May 1st, for me, is about a week or so before, maybe 2 weeks before swarm season is coming. And what I'm doing is I'm artificial swarming a week or 2 in advance of swarm season. So I don't want to let my bees swarm. A strong colony especially, I'm going to artificial swarm. I actually artificial swarm every colony in the yard May 1st, around then. And instead of losing that queen, honey, bees, my money, time into my neighbor's yard or off into the woods, instead I'm swarming it myself. I've got control over those bees, okay? Now it begs the question, well, aren't I weakening my colony to the point where I can't, harvest honey or increase bees? And on the outside, it looks like that might be the case, but the reality is, a month later, I've got 4 or 5 colonies producing. Just do the math. How many eggs are being laid a day by 4 or 5 queens as opposed to 1 queen? And then I can recombine those at any time and do whatever I want to do with my bees. So the issue is not having a high capacity colony all year long. The issue is having a high capacity colony when you need it, right before a flow, or right before you're going to want to produce nukes to sell or to increase, etc. So does that make sense? Okay. So I haven't lost a swarm. I used to run down the street in Oregon chasing swarms and people wondering what's going on. But I haven't lost a swarm in about 5 or 6 years now. And all of my colonies are in my backyard, out the back fence. My kids watch my bees all day long. They see them. Also, I'm always in my hives. I can tell it's queenless or not, or it's had queen cells, etc. So I honestly haven't lost a swarm in at least 5 years. And it's because I'm artificial swarming just before swarm season using OTS. So that's, I did a blog post a couple years ago. This is my backyard by the railroad tracks. I went from May 1st, 11 colonies that were overwintered to 26 plus 9 that I sold. And just, it's amazing. 11 colonies that year turned into like 60 or 70. And I sold maybe 20, 25, I don't remember how many. But that's a typical, what my yard typically looks like using OTS. And as you can see, I'm cobbling together whatever I can to stick bees in because I don't have enough space. I'm, building stuff. I'm buying old stuff, whatever. These days, I make enough from nuke sales to just buy whatever equipment I want and left over. So, an important part I mentioned it at the beginning was the suppression of mites, and I want to explain what that means. What's his name was just at the
Randy Oliver.
Randy, and then another guy, the other guy, Jamie Ellis. His stuff, if you can go back and find it, I did a blog post on Jamie's presentation, but it's so very good on the idea of, he's from Florida, University of Florida, he's been doing bees forever, and he's a researcher, and that's all he focuses on really is mites, and really he preached to us in Worcester, I said it right, not Worcester, Worcester. I'm from Alaska. He preached to us the need to sample. He just drilled it into us. You need to sample, and I really highly suggest one of the Man Lakers sells a plastic, orange and white, plastic mite sampler that it has like a cup within a cup with a sieve, and with a handy mark, you dump bees in, scrape bees in to a certain mark. It gives you 300 bees. You just enough alcohol to cover those bees, tighten up the lid good, and you shake it for the same amount of seconds, the same aggressiveness for like a minute, 2 minutes, and then at the bottom, the bees are at the top, the mites sink to the bottom. You can do a quick count. You've got to be doing that for every colony 3 times a year for us here. Probably May, July, September. I mean, how often do you sample, Dan?
Oh, I check more often than that.
More often than that. Okay,
Yeah.
but at a minimum, every other month, Jamie said you got to be at least every other month sampling.
And I check 10% of every yard once a month.
Yes.
So.
And if you've got 4, 5, 6 hives, do them all. If you've got 50, 60 hives, do 10%. And let it educate you. What's my yard doing? What do I need to do to this yard to treat it, etc. Anyways, back to suppressing mites. OTS, like I mentioned, creates a brood break. 30 days. You got to understand that the mites on the 5th day, just before larvae are capped, those mites jump into the cell. It's capped over. I forget the exacts, but I think the first, there's an egg laid. The first one that hatches is a male, and from then on it's females, I think is the way it goes. So a bunch of mites are growing in that cell. When that bee emerges, all those mites come out, and basically every 13 days, your mites are almost doubling every 13 days. So just think about the exponential value, how quickly mites can ruin your hive. If you checked July 1st and you only saw one mite, it doesn't mean anything. You need to check again because they can really exponentially overtake your hive. Anyways, if I remove the queen from the hive, obviously there's no queen laying in that hive for 30 days. Okay. On the 24th day, after I killed that queen or removed her from the hive, every last bee has emerged from the cells, including drones. So on the 25th day, 24th day, there's no bees under capping. Okay, the new queen comes back into the hive and she starts mating. And what's gonna happen is you're sacrificing the first 400 or 500 bees to the mites. All these mites have been in that hive waiting for larvae to eat. Nothing to eat. She starts laying. On the 5th day after she starts laying, there's larvae about ready to be capped. All the mites jump into those cells. Too many mites. They're capped over. There's too many mites that can live off of just one larva, and they starve. That's what happens. You can. Now it's not going to get every mite in your hive, but there's two things that are going to happen. You're going to have some mites self-destruct, and you're also preventing them from exponentially increasing for 30 days. You're letting the mites or the bees catch up with the mites and out-surpass them through egg laying, brood rearing. So that especially in July, for us here in Ohio, can really put a damper on mites. In fact, I haven't been treating for mites other than OTS until this last year, when I started checking with alcohol and realizing, oh, I need to do another method, either formic, the MAC, however you say it, MAQS strips, or oxalic acid is what I'm doing now, the vapor. And here's the cool part. With a brood break, on that 25th day, when every mite is actually phoretic, clinging to a bee, there's no mite under a capping, that's a perfect time to do oxalic vapor. You're going to kill just about every mite in the hive. And then you're going to have that queen lay, and it's going to be fresh, uninjured, young bees going into fall and winter. So that's the way that brood breaks can suppress mites in your apiary. Any questions about that? Good. So I've compiled, there's a blog post about this, 7 keys to successful, here, or you could reread this, 7 lessons that I've learned about OTS. Number 1, only healthy colonies with substantial resources can raise queens, quality queens. The biggest mistake people make with raising queens on their own is not enough bee density to raise healthy queens. So a queen that's raised to maturity, they need to stack that cell with royal jelly into her entire life until they cap it. In a hive that doesn't have enough bee density, you're not getting enough royal jelly in that cell. Maybe even not enough quality royal jelly. There's different thinking about this, but Mel defines a quality or a strong enough colony to raise queens with this method as one that has at least 4 frames of brood, and that would be in 1 box. You wouldn't want it any bigger than 1 box, but at least 4 frames of brood. Number 2, strong hives must always do the work of building queen cells. That's self-explanatory. Number 3, the 2-step 1-week process. It's 2 steps. The first week, I'm removing the queen as an artificial swarm, and I'm notching in the queenless colony. I'm coming back, the second step, 1 week later, 7 days later, and I'm going into the colony, and I'm looking for queen cells. And then a key for when you make your new starts, your new splits, is leaving only 1 or 2 queen cells with that split. You don't want a bunch of, like, a lot of people make the mistake of leaving 8 or 10 cells in there. The first one might hatch and go get mated, and you got virgins then doing after swarms. You can get into queens fighting each other and getting injured. You just don't want to take that risk. So you want to leave just 1 or 2 cells in that colony. Number 4, for us in Ohio, there's a couple key times to notch right before swarm season, about a week, and that'd be about May 1st. And then post-solstice, about June 21st, June 22nd to July 1st, anywhere in there, post-solstice, because this is a cool part as well about mite suppression. A typical colony with a queen building up right now, April, May, they're going to let her lay strong until about August. I think it's August. And then she's going to quickly ramp down. But when I raise a queen in July, she starts laying August 1st. They let her begin laying like a spring queen again. And she can help outbreed mite issues in your hive. She can catch up with that brood break so you have enough bees going into winter. It's kind of counterintuitive. It feels like I shouldn't be killing my queen July 1st. We got fall approaching, but it actually works out because post-solstice queens, for whatever reason, those bees let her lay like a spring queen. They feed her enough and move her around the hive to help her lay. Number 6, we talked about number 5. Number 6, be ruthless with a weak or laying worker hives. This is another paradigm shift for me. In the past, I would babysit. I would try and rescue every last little weak hive in my yard, right? Because if I lost it, I have to go buy more bees. But now, with the ability to raise queens so easily and to split my hives, it's not cost effective, and I don't want to perpetuate weak genetics or sickness or disease. I'm ruthless now with weak hives, and you can hear like Kirk Webster and some other guys online talk about this. Not Kirk, but the New Hampshire guy, Vermont guy. Anyways, Palmer. Yeah, Palmer. He's a big preacher of don't break up your weak hives and use those resources in your other colonies. That's really important to do. It'll help you put your energies behind good genetics, good queens, good bees, instead of wasting your time and resources on trying to prop up sick hives. And then number 7, I mentioned, make sure you have enough boxes on hand because you're gonna need them. So, any questions?
When you're doing this, do you lay on the bee foam really heavy, or?
I probably should, but I don't. Okay. I've taken if they're going to live, they're going to live approach. And if they're going to, I must say I'm really careful with the weather and the flows, how things are going, or how much I split them. If it seems like a bad year, we had a really rainy June 2 or 3 years ago. I'll be careful with how aggressively I split them, how much feed I give them. But I don't feed them at all.
So if you reduce the amount of damage that you're doing with mites, what are you finding to be what you're working against the most as far as damage in your hives?
It's still mites. Yeah, and I've seen that more over the last couple of years, and that's pushed me to do oxalic alongside.
Now you went to a vaporizer. What type of vaporizer?
Yeah, I actually bought the nice one, the ProVap.
Okay.
That's like $400.
Because
it only takes 30 seconds per hive. I've got 60 hives at that point in the year, right. 70 hives. I want it to go quick.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I think you can dribble, oxalic dribble. I think Richard does that. He's a big proponent of dribbling. That works. The Max work, the Formic strips. Really?
Not well.
Not well, really.
Not well.
Oh.
If you go online, you'll often hear right now talked about using oxalic acid mixed with glycerin and put on a paper towel, specifically the Scott's paper towels. That is still an experimental phase.
Randy Oliver talks about it on his website, but that is still technically illegal to do. Keep that in mind, okay? But because I talk to a lot of the commercial guys, because I'm in that world, I hear about the guys who are doing it anyway. And I have to tell you, the results are either fantastic or horrific. There's no middle ground. I know some guys who have killed 1,000 hives at a crack doing that method because they burned their bees. So I highly recommend you don't do that at the moment. It's not perfected.
Still out. He doesn't, because sometimes his mites
Correct.
explode, so you still haven't.
Correct. He hasn't.
Figured it out yet.
It has not been figured out enough that that is a reliable method.
Last year, and you have to start it again this year because.
Right. It is not a reliable enough method right now to even consider.
It sounds exciting.
We'll ignore that one.
I didn't say that one.
Right.
But the formic, I've had a couple of people I helped that it's worked okay. So. And the formic is really got to be careful with temperature.
Yep.
When you're splitting and you're moving a queen to, say, a nuke, like I don't know nothing about these. So you're moving a queen to a nuke, and with the brood, so on and so forth. My question is, why doesn't that queen go back to where it came from?
She'll stick with that in that news. It's amazing. They stay put. Now, if I kept it in the same yard, the forager bees, or at least a good chunk of them, will fly back to the old hive because they're used to that spot. They've been out getting nectar. They're zeroed in on that spot. They're going to go back. You can help them reorient by throwing a bunch of brush in front of it. It could be just a wives' tail. It seems to work for me. I throw a bunch of leafy branch in front. It forces them to work to get out, and then they reorient in front of the hive. You can watch them, and then they seem to come back. It seems to work. But the queen, as long as she's on a frame of brood and able to lay, and she's got her offspring around her, she'll stay put.
So you have to move her kids with her.
Yeah. If you're introducing a new queen, you just have to do it carefully. You have to do it gradually. And there's different methods for that. I don't know what you guys preach for that, but typically I would keep her in the cage for a couple days, 3 days before I release her. So when I create that split, just to reiterate, usually you're going to find her on a frame with eggs, larvae, and brood, somewhere in the middle or in the brood chamber. You're taking her out, so usually you're going to have like at least a half frame of brood, cap brood with her, and I'm sticking her right in the middle. Then I go right back and find the best frame of cap brood I can find, usually. Take that out with the bees on it, stick it in. And then I'm going back and looking for a couple more frames of brood because it's got nurse bees on there. They're smaller, they move slower, they haven't been outside the hive yet. Their job is taking care of brood. I'm shaking 2 shakes of bees, of nurse bees with her as well, and putting those back. And then I need to give her a full frame of honey, especially, and looking for one that has pollen on it. If not, I might find another one with a half frame of pollen and empty cells with her. That would make a nice nuke, and I would need to put another box on her, in another week or 2, or less.
First starts talking about queen.
Yeah.
I want to tell them that.
Yeah, that really is, I think, one of the weakest areas for most beekeepers that I talk to is finding a queen. And I think it just takes diligence and practice and not being afraid and keep trying and learning the tips for doing that.
Now, one thing that I've noticed in the past, and I imagine you've noticed it as well, when you mate your own queens, okay, a lot of times commercial produced queens, they've been queen banked for a short period of time. So they don't actually develop the full swollen ovaries and the length that you see in one that you've mated in your own yard. Have you noticed that your queens are substantially larger than the ones you buy?
Oh, yeah.
That does make it easier to spot them when
Yeah.
she's a full centimeter or 2 too long compared to the drones. Okay.
She lumbers around.
So that is one advantage of raising your own queens. It's one of the reasons why we're going to be raising queens at the farm parks, because Right now, I'm buying queens from a breeder who's running a Canadian line so that I'm getting northern stock in Florida because I don't want southern bees. But because I know that there's that banking delay, I know that the ovaries have never fully lengthened. Okay, that is a very important distinction when you're doing it this way. It will be a substantially bigger queen, so keep that in mind.
You were saying something like in July, you're putting your queen into a spring mode.
Say again?
In July, you're putting your queen into a spring sort of breeding session.
Yeah, what I do in July, in the summer is I actually remove every queen in my yard. I kill them or give them away. And I want to requeen every colony in my yard. I want a new queen going into fall. And I want all the young bees that she's going to produce in August and September, even October, going into fall that aren't injured by mites. And that's a whole total paradigm shift. And some people think that's crazy because we're used to trying to keep a queen alive for 2 or 3 years like that's a great thing. And it is in the past. But things are changing with pesticide pressure, genetic pressure. Keeping a queen alive for a couple years is difficult. And so,
Let me ask you this then. Today I was I watching something and showed a bell curve of the bees and then they ramped down at a certain period.
right,
Then the bell curve of the Varroa.
right,
Once the bees start coming down, the bell curve of the Varroa are peaking.
right,
At the same time, they're dropping.
right. That's
Can you
collapse.
discuss that?
Yeah, it does. That's where people lose their bees. Is when it hits that, when the mites catch up with the bees, right there, it's a collapse. You got maybe 2 or 3 weeks left, and your hive's dead. And
So the July method, I'll just call it the July method.
yeah,
That's helping because you're ramping up the same time the Varroa is ramping.
yeah. I wish I had. I can
It's also
post.
brew break.
I can post a chart that exactly addresses what you're talking about to the meeting Facebook link. And what happens with when I kill the queen, I notch and I'm raising a new queen, the mite levels stops, right? And so do the bees. Then my new queen starts laying and my bee numbers rocket. And a lot of my mites actually drops because it's killing a lot of those mites in the cells. That's when there's when the mites overload the cells. There's too many feeding off of one larva. On the 5th day, when she starts to lay again, the new queen.
They simply perish because they starve to death.
Yeah.
They end up killing that first 500 bees that are in the cells. They all go into, predate against those young larvae. Those young larvae die on them while they're trying to feed, but they're capped in. They don't have the strength to even claw their way out.
But I'm happy.
Succumb.
Yeah, happy to let 500 bees perish to save a colony. No big deal.
Absolutely.
It's about what you get in the wash too, anyway, right?
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you talk about queens like that. Did you hear Randy Oliver down in Tri-State when he was doing similar? He's taken they operate between 1,000 and 1,500 hives. They're monitoring your hives for Varroa. As the ones get higher, they're taken to they're marked, and they keep going down. He's keeping like 2% of his queens, and he's only keeping the strongest and the most successful ones. He's wiping out the other.
Lines.
To wipe out 1,000 hive queens and just grab off those for. And I was wondering how that would work up here. So thank you. That's
Yeah. So with this method, the best bee in my yard is the one that survives the winter, right? That's. It may not be perfect, but I'll take a surviving colony that's giving me good honey and making it over the winter, and then that over time with us all doing the same thing in our different ways, it's going to help a lot.
Is what you've talked about tonight, is all that outlined in that OTS Queen Rearing book?
Yes, right. Much better than I did.
Actually, there's no
Brooklyn, wherever his name is, he has to talk at one of these
Yes,
clubs for a couple hour talk. I
Right.
forget which one it is, but you can find that.
yeah, he
If
spoke
you
at the
YouTube
Indiana.
that, you'll find his talk.
He's, yeah, he spoke at, yeah, Discipline. He spoke at the Indiana Beekeepers, some Indiana club, a few years ago. There's links on that in the Facebook.
Just graphic.
I have, yeah.
So how does that compare? I mean, this seems, I can see pros and cons for both, and what is your?
If I was going to sell queens, or if I was going to expand rapidly to 1,000 or 2,000 colonies, I'm going to graft. It's just a better use of my time. But for 99% of beekeepers, we don't necessarily need to. I think it's a good skill to learn and to try. It's amazing. It's just amazing to grow 50 or 60 cells in one, at one time. So.
Can you spell the author's name?
Yeah, Mel, M-E-L, Disselcohen. Let me just back up. There he is. And his website, MDA Splitter. That's a proprietary tool he created a long time ago. I built him a website, but he won't use it yet. So, yeah.
How much is the book?
The book is way too much. It's $75. Well, we can cut that out of the video, maybe, right? My wife is bringing
live.
No, it's okay. I mean, I said the same to Mel, and but Mel says, how much do you spend buying a new colony of bees?
Yeah.
And if
Almost
this,
half the price of a new.
right, if this helps you be self-sustainable, it's worth every penny, and I agree. I am glad about the book. So.
Small scale publishing is very expensive
It
too.
is.
So.
And he ships it from his home and puts them together himself. So.
I will try to put a link on the YouTube video to that book. So
There's people in here who know that they're getting their bees in the next few weeks, and they're starting out fresh. They have no overwinter. What do you suggest for them?
Growing them is, feeding them as much as you can, getting them strong as you can by, if you're going to do this method, as strong as you can by July 1st. And if you've got 6-8 frames of brood, which is doable, by July, they're a good candidate for OTS.
I highly recommend on that note, if you want to get them that strong, feed for 7 days, don't feed for 5. Feed for 7 days, don't feed for 5.
Good.
Keep that cycle rolling. What that does is that it allows you to feed them heavily. They will store some of that nectar, and they will be basically artificially honey bound with the sugar feed. Okay, that 5 days of not feeding them will open up some of the comb. The queen will immediately fill it with eggs. Now that they don't have that comb anymore, it will force them to draw out more comb quicker, and that cycle will repeat. By doing it that way, instead of just constantly feeding them, you ensure that you're actually going to get more generations and a rolling growth.
Yeah.
You can, when you first get a new package, overfeed them to the point where they flat will not grow. And that's something I see and often happens with new people packages. So
So you do that with a brand new package?
absolutely.
7.5?
7.575. Keep doing that until it's drawn out. What's that?
1-to-1 or 2-to-1?
Actually, I usually go 2-to-1 the wrong way. So I go 2 parts water to 1 part sugar, especially in the spring, because I want it to simulate nectar. I don't want them to store it. They're going to, but I don't want them to.
Really, the key is comb building. That's the secret to long-term success. Is you're always looking for comb is so valuable, and getting them to build the comb and making sure, like you said, you have open comb for the queen to lay in. And so, reading up on checkerboarding and all the ways that you can manipulate things to get them to build comb quicker. It's worth your time looking into checkerboarding and things like that. All right. Thanks for letting me talk.